Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the government staggers from Brexit vote to Brexit vote, precarious and confused, but still winning when it matters. Just when you think no political party could be in more of a mess over Brexit than the Tories, then up pops good old Jez's Labour Party to make you think again. Amid the shambles and vacillation in both major parties, the Leavers console themselves that we are still leaving, if not on anything like the terms they'd hoped. Most Remainers take comfort from that, reconciled to leaving, but on the softest of terms that makes rejoining the EU, well, not entirely out of the question at some stage. But the provisional wing of the Remainers wants no truck with such defeatist talk. It wants to reverse the referendum decision. It wants to reverse it now. What's more, it thinks we'd never have voted to leave in the first place if it hadn't been for those interfering pesky Ruskies. Here's Anthony Grayling with his take of the week.
There are many reasons for thinking that the outcome of the EU referendum is questionable. Now, one of them is outside interference, and especially Russian interference. Now that Mr. Aaron Banks has confessed to having had boozy lunches with the Russian ambassador, it's harder than ever to quell those suspicions. After all, Russia has an interest in destabilizing the EU and probably would like to see it break up. But leave aside the question of Russian interference in the referendum. It's thrown a stark light, this whole situation, on our democratic order, which depends upon people being honourable. We've heard from Mr. Banks and his colleague Andrew Wigmore that they deliberately led people up the garden path, that they played on their emotions rather than on facts and reason. What we really need to do is to ensure that our democratic system works properly. We need to codify it so that everybody can be clear about the right thing to do. And in this age of social media, the Electoral Commission is outdated and in any case virtually toothless. It can't control the amount of money spent on campaigns. And when you look at the contemptuous and arrogant behaviour of Mr. Banks and Mr. Wigmore before the Parliamentary Committee, you see that Parliament can't hold people to account unless they want to be held to account. As for our power-grabbing government, their narrow victories in the EU withdrawal bill votes this week were only possible because there is no formal separation of powers between the executive and the legislature. Whipped by their party leaders, MPs can't vote on their conscience or judgment about what's in the best interests of the country. Instead, they're mindlessly waving Brexit through, the most gobsmacking harm that this country has ever inflicted on itself. No matter how confidently David Davis says that Brexit can't be reversed, it can be and it will be. The reason why Brexiters oppose a people's vote on the final deal is because they know that if there is such a vote, Remain will win it. As Brexit crumbles under the weight of its own contradictions and allegations of corruption, voters are changing their minds. Halting Brexit is no longer a question of if, but of when. There you are, that tells them.
And Anthony Grayling joins us. And now, welcome to the programme. Let's just get something factual out of the way first. What evidence is there that the Russians had any influence on the Brexit referendum?
Well, I think there's been some very remarkable investigative journalism done by The Observer. It looks as though Mr. Banks, Mr. Wigmore, before the Parliamentary Committee, didn't deny that they'd been having lunches with the Russian ambassador.
But lots of people have lunch with the Russian ambassador. What is the evidence that the Russians attempted to influence the referendum?
Well, it would be very interesting to see indeed if the Home Secretary carries through with his suggestion that he might look at the possibility of criminal charges, for example. We might see some of the hard evidence that the investigative journalists have been digging up.
But you haven't got the evidence.
I don't myself, no.
But you've made the claim. without the evidence.
No, I haven't made the claim myself.
No, you have. You've claimed that we wouldn't have even voted for Brexit if it hadn't been for the Russians.
Oh, that claim, yes.
So, but you have no evidence to back that up.
I do. I have evidence to suggest that the debate about the way the Leave campaign was run, about the overspending on the part of both wings of the Leave campaign, about the fact that the people who were involved in the Leave campaigns had a lot of contact with people outside the United Kingdom and especially in Russia. This begins to add up to a story which I said in that...
None of that's evidence at all. Not a single bit of evidence that would survive a minute in court.
Do you know, if you were talking to, say, a scientist in a laboratory who was looking at initial hypotheses and trying to work out where you might go to conduct an experiment, you would be following your nose about the suspicions that have been raised by a situation like this.
Suspicions are one thing, evidence is the other. But anyway, let's move on. What do you make of the overall argument of the take?
Well, at least C Grayling is honest enough to say that he wants to reverse the decision the British people has made by having another referendum, whereas many people who I think the same thing refuse to admit that that is what they're trying to do, to reverse the decision of the British people. Now, if you want to lecture people about democracy, it is perfectly clear that the British people were told that they would vote on once only. They were told that their vote would be decisive, that Parliament would then implement the decision that they made. All of that was absolutely unambiguous. I understand, I think you chaired a meeting at the European Commission yesterday, I understand that it is the European view that referendums should be held and held again and held again until the people produce the result that the establishment wants in the first place. This is what was done in the case of Denmark, in the case of France, in the case of Ireland. And it's come as a surprise to people like you in the European Commission that in Britain our democracy works on the basis that you tell people what the vote is about and then you trust them because we are a democracy.
Can we
now
the
vote hasn't worked out the way that you wanted, and in your paternalistic way, you believe that the British people have got it wrong, and in your paternalistic way you go on to tell the people that they must now vote for a second time.
All right, let her respond, please.
May we just unpick a few things there? Firstly, it wasn't the European Commission yesterday. It was a group. It was a group of British Remainers meeting. We very often invite people from Parliament to come along and tell us what's going on. Be able to ask.
You had Mr. Verhofstadt, didn't you?
It had nothing to do with the European Commission
yesterday. Was it him
yesterday.
you saw?
No. Oh, but that was months ago. Months ago. You talk about the British people. I mean, this is such a canard. It was 37% of a restricted electorate. When the franchise was handed out for the EU referendum, people who had a genuine material interest in the outcome of it, our own expats, for example, EU citizens who live in this country, who marry to Brits, who bring their children up here and paying their taxes here, they weren't given a voice. And of that electorate...
But these were the rules.
Come on a second, I'm sorry.
These were the rules.
You want facts. Of that electorate, 37% of that electorate voted to leave. Under what circumstances in any mature constitution could that count as a mandate for a major constitutional change?
You name any other decision
you talk about the British
made by
people.
16 million people
that
voting on a single day.
37% of the electorate is 26% of the population. So don't use the phrase "the British people" because the British people haven't decided.
Let me bring Liz.
That's number one.
I want to bring...
final point. One final point, if I may.
Liz in.
We would love to have Liz in, but just one final point.
And
in a mature, sensible, grown-up democracy, our Parliament should have met after that. Our Parliament ought to have met after the referendum, and they should have asked themselves the following question. This was an explicitly advisory referendum.
No, it wasn't.
30%.
No, it wasn't.
I'm terribly sorry. I'm terribly sorry.
Parliament would implement.
Michael,
all right, I'm going to bring Liz. I'm going to bring Liz in.
You've got to get that. I'm sorry. You've got to get the facts right.
You don't get to dominate this.
I'm not.
You've already had your
I just want to get the facts right.
I want to bring Liz Kendall in.
Because people talk such a lot of BS about this.
Yeah. All right. Well, people will make up their mind who's talking that. Liz Kendall. Lots of Remainers deny they want to thwart Brexit, but they really do. Isn't Mr. Grayling just being honest?
Some do, and they're pretty honest about it in the Commons. There are some MPs who said they do want to overturn it, but many who said we don't. What we're trying to do is find a way through that brings the country together and solves the problem.
But what's wrong with his line of trying to... if you really disagree strongly with it, what's wrong with trying to reverse... I mean, nothing is forever.
Then you should say it.
And you don't?
No.
But you think it?
No.
You don't?
always accepted the result of that referendum. What I'm trying to do is figure out a way that we can not screw the economy, save jobs, and keep a close relationship with the EU. And I understand your frustration about talk of the will of the people, as if everybody who voted Leave or Remain had all exactly the same views. But where I would disagree with you is people in Parliament aren't just towing the party line. They are voting with their conscience. They are trying to work across the House. And I think, actually, for all the problems, we've seen Parliament doing a really good job.
You want to reverse it.
I do.
How, in your view, is the most likely way that could happen?
With a people's vote on the final deal. Let the people...
A second referendum, but not like the first, in the sense that it would be on the deal itself rather than the principle.
Yeah, on the deal itself. Let's have a look and see whether what we've got at the moment as full members of the EU is going to be bettered by something. Let's see whether our economy is going to flourish under the new arrangements.
What would be wrong with that?
Well, it's not the deal that was done. And a moment ago, AC Grayling was saying that talking about the British people was nonsense and rubbish, and now he's saying that it should be the people's choice. But the people have already made a choice. And I was in this studio before the referendum, and I kept saying, you see, if the referendum goes the way the establishment doesn't want it, they'll soon be back saying there ought to be a second referendum, which is what they've done to every other European country. Because it's part of the bullying culture of the European Union that if a people defies what the establishment wants to do,
Well,
they have to be bullied, they have to be punished, they have
You've
to be
made that
threatened.
point.
In the general
No,
election,
I haven't talked about
actually,
being bullied and threatened, which
in
we
the
are
general
with things
election-
like being told we can't be in the Galileo project. And it's because of all this bullying and paternalism that you lost the referendum in the first place.
So sorry,
and
I mean,
you shouldn't
it
be
just-
confident about a second referendum.
Can I just
because
say,
I believe
there was a
the
general
very fact
election,
that you demanded
Michael.
Liz.
There was a general election. May said, give me a mandate for my hard Brexit. And she lost her majority. So there are different ways of giving people a say. And I'm afraid at the last election, she didn't get the answer she wanted.
Hasn't Brexit, in a way, discombobulated you? I mean, you are a respected professor, but you've suggested that the government sent a Royal Navy frigate to the South China Sea so the Chinese could sink it and change the news agenda. You've called Brexiteers vermin, that's 17.4 million people. You call for a general strike to halt Brexit.
Okay, stop right there. I mean, look...
And you called for ultra-Remainers, you said they're being silenced by the forces of the state, which I guess is why you're not here tonight.
No, come on. I mean,
All of that's true.
This is absurd, honestly. I made a joke about the frigate, right? I didn't call the people who voted Leave vermin. I said there were vermin. I named 4 people in the Conservative Party and 1 person outside it in UKIP, and I called them vermin, and on very good grounds. Why? Because Michael talks about bullying and paternalism and all the rest of it, whereas actually the Leave campaign, which you obviously are in favour of, lied through its teeth, made false promises,
So did the Remain
deceived.
campaign.
I'm sorry, they did not. And one very good reason why they didn't...
Top members
was
of the
because-
government lied all the way through the campaign.
About what, Michael? Give
Well,
us some
for
lines.
example-
£350 million for the National
For
Health
example,
Service?
the Chancellor of the Exchequer said it would be necessary to have a punishment budget immediately after the vote if we were to vote to leave. That was clearly not true.
All right,
You
let's
also
not
promised us £350 million
relitigate the last
this
referendum.
This doesn't deal with the issue of why people voted to leave.
Our guest tonight
what
is
their
talking
anger and
about trying to get
frustrations
another
are. That's what
referendum.
we
Let's
should be
not
focusing on.
refight the previous one. If you got a second referendum on the deal and you lost, would that be it for you?
I would accept it, yes.
You would accept
I would
it?
accept it, and I'll tell you why. Because in the 2 years that have elapsed since the first referendum, we've had some actual facts about what it means to be members of the EU, about what the impact would be on our economy. And this is something which, you know, the Leavers, like Michael, it's so deeply disappointing. Because what they don't look at it, the very best case scenario that the government has put out about the impact shows that our economy would take a big hit. And what does that mean? That means people out of work. That means families without a breadwinner in them. That means less money for the NHS and for state education.
Okay, as I said,
and all this kind of thing.
I didn't want to fight the
talk
last
about
referendum.
arrogance and paternalism. You know, to hell with the people who are going to suffer.
If you
our
get a
economy
second
tanks.
referendum,
But let's go ahead with
if
it.
you get a second referendum, we can go through all that. But for tonight, as we finish, How would you rate your chances of getting a second referendum?
I'm confident that if, firstly, I'm confident that a people's vote is more rather than less likely to happen. The dynamic is moving in that direction. I was visiting.
So you think it will happen?
Oh yeah, I'm hoping so.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.